In estimating the market value of a residence by the sales comparison approach, the appraiser verified a bunch of stuff. And then we go down here, finally we get to the question. The indicated value of the subject residence was accordingly. So they want us to do a CMA. They've given us all of this information about the property, and they want us to do a CMA on that property. So we need to make our two columns. Whenever we're working with a CMA, we're always going to set up a column for our subject property and a column for our comparable. And then we're going to start filling in the information that we have. It says the appraiser verified the $92,000 sales price of a comparable residence. Okay, so we're just going to put $92,000. We know that's what the comp sold for. And estimated that prices for a similar residence had increased by 1.5% since the date of sale of the comparable residence. So we're going to have to adjust for appreciation here. And what we know as far as appreciation goes is that we've gone up plus 1.5%. So we'll come back and do the math here in a second, but we know it's gone up plus 1.5%. After comparing features of the comparable and subject residences, she made adjustments for 4 factors as follows. Number 1, the neighborhood. So we're going to put neighborhood here because we're adjusting for it. And it says the subject is better by $1,500. Okay? Subject is better by $1,500. We can't use that statement. Everything we do in a CMA is based on the comp, not based on the subject. We need to restate that in terms of the comp. So how do we say subject better in terms of the comp? Well, everything's opposite. If subject is better, then comp is worse. So we restate that as comp is worse by $1,500. So that's exactly what we're going to write here. The comp is worse by $1,500 for neighborhood. So we've dealt with that. Okay, we can get rid of it. Number 2, it says the subject, as far as the lot, right? They want us to adjust for lots. So we're going to put lot here next. The subject is better by $750. Again, restated as the comp. If the subject is better, then the comp is worse. So here on the comp, we're going to put worse by $750. And we've dealt with that, so we can get rid of it. Number 3, size of the house. So we're adjusting for size. I'm going to put size here. And what they tell us is that the comparable is better by $2,600. So that's it. Since it's stated as the comparable, I just need to write it in. Better by $2,600. And then finally, condition. That condition. The comparable is better by $600. Okay? So condition. Comparable is better by $600. So now we're ready to make all of our adjustments. They want to know the value of the property. So now we just want to make our adjustments here. The first one they tell us is that we need to adjust for is appreciation. Now appreciation is a positive adjustment. We've gone up 1.5%. Well, it's 1.5% of the $92,000 that we've got over there. So when we're talking about appreciation, it's $92,000 times 1.5%. And when we do that math, that's $1,380. So this is going to be plus $1,380. For our appreciation adjustment. The next adjustment we come to is the neighborhood, and it says the comp is worse by $1,500. So that means we need to bring the level of the comp up. We need to adjust up. Remember, you're always adjusting back to what your subject property is. So we need to go up by $1,500 for the neighborhood adjustment. the lot, the comp is worse by $750. So again, that's going to be a positive adjustment up $750. It says the size, the comparable is better by $2,600. So we need to bring the comparable down. So it's going to be minus $2,600. And then condition, it says the comparable is better by $600. So that's going to be minus $600. And so now it's just a matter of totaling these up, of going through and adding and subtracting all of these adjustments. So if we do $92,000, we start with $92,000 because that's our sales price, plus $1,380, plus $1,500, plus $750, minus $2,600, minus $600, we end up with a grand total of $92,430 as the indicated value of that property. $92,430, the indicated value of that property. All right. Moving on to number 3. Number 3 is a very straightforward, simple one. It says a comparable property is 125 square feet smaller than the subject. At $40 per square foot, what adjustment should be made? So, again, you can write down, if you still struggle with adjustments at all, subject, comparable, and here's what we know about the comparable. The comparable is 125 square feet smaller. So if it's smaller, then we need to make it bigger. We need to go up. We need to adjust up. So it's plus, and it's going to be plus 125 square feet times $40 per square foot. And so when we do that number, that is plus $5,000. And that's going to be our answer. Our adjustment is plus, and remember adjustments always have a plus or a minus. It's plus $5,000. Number 4, an owner listed his property for sale with a broker. At what price must the property be sold to net the owner $14,000 after he pays 10% commission and satisfies his mortgage of $22,000? Again, the question, find it. At what price must the property be sold? This is a seller net question. Whenever we have a seller net question, remember we're going to think of the whole transaction as a pie chart, which represents 100%. But there's a slice coming out of that pie. The brokerage commission is a 10% slice coming out of that pie, which means the seller's slice of the pie, or the remainder, is 90%. So now let's look at the cash side of things. The owner needs to net $14,000. So we need that much cash. He's also got to pay off a mortgage of $22,000. So in total, we need $36,000 in cash, but that's after we've paid our commission. So what we need to do is take this $36,000 and divide it by the 90% share that the seller has left over. So $36,000 divided by 90% is going to equal $40,000 that we would need to sell that property for. We would need to sell that property for $40,000. Number 5 says the ABC Real Estate Company listed a piece of real estate at $4.50 per square foot. The land dimensions are 50 feet by 137 feet. If the commission rate is set at 7.25%, what amount will the seller pay ABC Real Estate Company if the property sells for the listed price? So it's a commission question. We know that, and so again, I want to highlight my question, what amount will the seller pay ABC Real Estate Company? So we don't know how much the commission is. And here's what they tell us about the commission. It's 7.25% of the sales price. So what we need to know in order to calculate a commission is we need to know the sales price. Here's what they tell us about the sales price. They tell us that the property is listed at $4.50 per square foot. They also give us dimensions. They say that the property is 50 feet by 137 feet. Well, if we take 137 times 50, we can figure out the square footage of that lot. So 137 times 50 gives us a square footage of 6,850 square feet. 6,850 square feet. Remember, at $4.50 per square foot. So we can multiply that times 6,850 square feet, and that will give us the list price and sales price of our property. So 6,850 times $4.58 a square foot is $30,825 that property is going to sell for. And we know that we're charging a 7.25% commission on that sale. So times 7.25% equals a commission of $2,234.81. $2,234.81 is your commission that's going to be due on the transaction in number 5. $2,234.81. Number 6 is an acreage question. How many acres are contained in a tract of land shaped like a right triangle with a depth of 120 feet and a width of 90 feet? Well, I want to draw my tract of land. We have a depth of 120 feet. Okay, good. And we have a width of 90 feet. Good. And it says shaped like a right triangle. So it's not a rectangle, it's a triangle. And we want to know how many acres are contained in that tract of land. Well, normally with acreage, we would just take length times width. But that's when we have a rectangular piece of land. Problem is we don't have a rectangular piece of land. We essentially have half of that. So what I would do is length times width, 120 times 90 equals 10,800 square feet. And then I would divide that by 2. Because you really only have half of it there. So that's 5,400 square feet. Now we want to convert that into acreage. And we have a T-bar that looks like this for acreage conversion. And on the top is square feet. And on the bottom is acres and 43,560, because that's the number of square feet in an acre of land. So if we want to know acreage, which is what the question's asking us for, that's going to be square footage divided by 43,560. So square footage of 5,400 divided by 43,560 equals 0.1239 or 124 acres. .1239 acres. There we go. Okay. Number 7. Michael purchased a personal residence 4 years ago for $275,000. On the day of purchase, he paid $5,500 in closing costs and $4,500 in discount points on his $225,000 mortgage. Okay, I'm starting to get a lot of information here, and none of it makes any sense until I know what the question is. So I'm going to scan ahead until I see the question. Finally, I do, all the way at the end. what is the total, so sorry, I didn't mean to mark through that, to highlight it. What is the total of Michael's capital gain? What is the total of his capital gain? Well, we know that when we talk about capital gains, we're talking about the difference between essentially what we've invested in the property and then what we have gotten when we sold the property. The invested side, the money we've invested, we call the adjusted basis. The money we keep when we sell, we call the amount realized. So we're going to start grouping these two things here. It says Michael purchased a personal residence 4 years ago. Well, we want to hang on to that thought and we'll revisit in a second, but this personal residence is going to be important. Michael purchased a personal residence 4 years ago for $275,000. So the $275,000, that's money he's invested in the property. So we're going to put that on the adjusted basis side of things. So we've dealt with that. On the day of purchase, he paid $5,500 in closing costs. Okay, so that's money we've invested. So we've got $5,500 in closing costs. He also paid $4,500 in discount points. Now the thing of it is, with capital gains, we don't care about loans, and therefore we don't care about any expenses that are related to loans. Well, discount points are a loan-based expense, so we're just going to eliminate the discount points and the $225,000 mortgage because mortgages don't matter when we're calculating a capital gain. Since that time, he spent $15,000 adding on a room addition in the garage. Well, that's money invested, so we're going to count that on our adjusted basis side. So we've dealt with that. $3,000 in street assessments. Well, street assessments are special assessments, so therefore that's an improvement to the property. So that's going to be money that we have invested, so we're going to include that $3,000 in the money we invested. And another $6,500 in redecorating. Well, good for him, but that doesn't count as money we've invested. Remember, we don't care about loans. We also don't care about things like maintenance and routine expenses. We care about improvements to the property, and redecorating is not an improvement to the property, so we're going to ignore it. He now sells the house for $390,000. He sells it for $390,000. That's going to go over here on the amount realized side. He pays his broker a $23,400 commission. Well, he pays the broker when he sells, so that's going to go over here, $23,400 in commission. And his bank, $194,300 loan payoff. Well, again, there's that word again, loan. We don't care about loans when we're talking about capital gains, so we're just going to eliminate that. Now, everything on our adjusted basis side is going to be a plus. We're adding all these numbers. Whereas everything on our amount realized side is going to be a minus. We're subtracting. So if we want to total these up, our amount realized is going to be $390,000 minus $23,400. And that leaves us with an amount realized of $366,600. And then on the adjusted basis side, if we total all that up, we've got $275,000 plus $5,500 plus $15,000 plus $3,000 equals, oh, that number's not right. When the number doesn't look right, type it in again. $275,000 plus $5,500 plus $15,000 plus $3,000. $298,500. So $298,500 is our adjusted basis. Our capital gain is going to be the difference between those two. So when we talk about a capital gain, we've got $366,600 as the amount realized. minus $298,500 is the adjusted basis. And so when we do that, we end up with a capital gain of $68,100. Let's go back and make sure that's what they asked us for. What is the total of his capital gain? That's what they wanted to know. They didn't ask us how much was the capital gains tax. They just want to know what is the capital gain. And the capital gain is $68,100. Now, we could go further than that if they had asked us, for example, how much was the capital gains tax? Well, the answer would be 0, because that personal residence thing from the first line would tell us that he would not owe capital gains on the first $250,000. But they didn't ask us for that, so total capital gain is $68,100. Number 8 looks like a closing statement question to me. And here's what I base that on. What is the additional amount must be paid by the buyer at the November 15th closing? In other words, how much money does the buyer need to bring to closing? They can state that in a bunch of different ways, but it always means the same thing. How much of a check does the buyer have to write in order to get this property closed on November 15th? And so we're going to do a closing statement. And when we do a closing statement, we're going to make our 4 columns here. So we're going to have buyer credits, buyer debits, seller credits, and seller debits. Those are our 4 columns on any closing statement. So we're just drawing them out. And we're ready to roll. Now we're ready to start filtering in money here. So it says, making a $4,000 earnest money deposit, buyer contracted to purchase a house for $92,000. So we got numbers right away we need to deal with. A $4,000 earnest money deposit. Earnest money is money already paid in advance by the buyer, so they need to be credited for it. They've already paid it, we need to give them credit for it. So $4,000 EMD. Just erase the dollar sign so it doesn't get confusing. $4,000 earnest money deposit. The buyer contracted to purchase a house for $92,000. That's the purchase price. Well, the purchase price is a debit to the buyer, so $92,000. We'll put PP for purchase price. But it's also a credit to the seller, so $92,000 credit to the seller for the purchase price. Okay, done with that. So the buyer will obtain a new first mortgage loan for $65,000. Okay, well, the buyer's mortgage loan is a credit to the buyer. So $65,000 credit to the buyer for the loan. Doesn't impact the seller's side at all. So we've dealt with that. Paying the mortgage company a 1.5% origination fee. So 1.5% of the loan amount, not of the sales price. Be careful with that. So we're going to take that $65,000 loan and multiply times 1.5%. $65,000 times 1.5% gives us $975 for our origination fee. And that's the buyer's loan, so it's going to be a buyer debit for $975. $975 origination. Okay? So we've dealt with that. Move through them one at a time. The balance of the purchase price will be paid in cash at closing. That's a meaningless statement. Of course the balance of the purchase price will be paid in cash at closing. That doesn't mean you need to do anything. That's the whole point of doing a closing statement, is calculating how much money needs to be paid in cash. Real estate taxes of $1,056 for the current year were paid by the seller in October. So the taxes have already been paid. Remember, when we deal with property taxes, we're going to write it out as 2 separate statements. Seller owes, And that's always going to start on January 1 and go through the day of closing. And just as a reminder, we go back up here, it's November 15th. So the seller owes for taxes through November 15th, January 1 through November 15th. Well, that means the buyer is left owing taxes. Buyer owes from November 16th, remember it starts the day after, through December 30th, because every month has 30 days when we do pre-licensing math. The question becomes, which one of these do we want? Which one matters? Well, we go back up here and it says real estate taxes of $1056 for the current year were paid by the seller in October. We want to do the opposite on our closing statement of what happens outside of closing. So outside of closing, the seller paid. That means at closing, it's the buyer who needs to pay. So we're going to circle that statement because that's what our proration is going to be about right there. November 16th through December 30th. So let's go ahead and figure our number of days. That's 15 days in November plus 30 days in December. So a total of 45 days worth of taxes. They tell us that the taxes are $1,056 for the current year. So $1,056 in taxes divided by 360 days in the year. That'll give us our daily rate. 1,056 divided by 360. And that means our taxes are $2.93. It's actually $2.933333. It just keeps going on. Per day times 45 days. So if we just do times 45 days, we end up with $132. And if you've got a few cents over or above or below that, it's fine. 132, 133, 131, anywhere in there, it's going to be fine. Okay, so $132. Now here's what we remind ourselves what we're doing. It's $132 that the buyer owes. Okay, well, buyer owes, that sounds a lot to me like a buyer debit. So 132, buyer debit. And with taxes, if we're debiting the buyer, then we're crediting the seller. So we're going to end up with a seller credit of 132 as well. And that takes care of our property tax proration. So we can mark through that statement. It says additional closing expenses that must be paid by the buyer amount to $578. Well, we don't really care what they are, but they're closing expenses that are going to be paid by the buyer, so we're just going to put them in here. $578 for expenses. Buyer debit. So we've dealt with that. Interim interest will not be paid at closing, but with the first payment. Well, that's music to our ears because it's one thing we don't have to calculate. If it's not being paid at closing, we're not doing anything with it. What additional amount must be paid by the buyer at the November 15th closing? So that's it. We've got everything in there. So what we need to do now is total up our columns here and figure out how much money we have available or how much money the buyer needs to bring. Well, if we total these up, the buyer's credits amount to $69,000 in buyer credits. The buyer debits, which take a little longer, is $92,000 plus $975 plus $132 plus $578 is $93,685 in buyer debits. The seller credits, even though we're not asked to the seller side, is $92,132. Oops, 132. And the seller has no debits. So they want to know, go back to the question, what additional amount must be paid by the buyer? Well, that's going to be the difference between the buyer's two columns. So these two numbers right here, the difference between those. So $93,000 $9,685 minus $69,000. That gives us a total cash that the buyer needs to have at closing of $24,685. $24,685 that that buyer needs to bring to closing in order to close that transaction. And again, there's all your credits and debits. Okay. Number 9, the Smiths obtained a 80% loan at 12% interest to purchase a house for $50,000, and they made a $1,000 earnest money deposit. How much cash do the Smiths need to close the transaction? So again, there's our question. How much cash do the Smiths need to close the transaction? This is another closing statement question. So we're going to do the exact same thing. We've got buyer credits, buyer debit, seller credits, seller debits. And we're just making our columns. And so let's start. It says the Smiths obtained an 80% loan at 12% interest to purchase a house for $50,000. Well, there's our first piece of information right there, $50,000. So that is the purchase price. That's going to be a debit from the buyer, $50,000 for the purchase price, and it's going to be a seller credit for $50,000. So we're done with that. And they made, and now we have to back up because they obtained an 80% loan. So 80% of that $50,000 is being borrowed. So $50,000 times 80% is going to tell us that our loan is for $40,000. So we've got a loan amount for $40,000. That's going to be a buyer credit. Alright, so that takes care of that. The 12% interest we may or may not need to know. If they ask us for interim interest, then we will. If not, then we won't. It says they made a $1,000 earnest money deposit. Well, an earnest money deposit is a credit to the buyer, so that's $1,000. That's nothing on the seller side because the seller doesn't have that money. They didn't touch that money. They have the following expenses: an attorney for $200. Well, that's a debit to the buyer, so $200 for the attorney. $100 for the survey. That's also a buyer debit. Taxes of $120. That's a buyer debit because they said they incurred the following expenses. And then title insurance of $100. That's also going to be a buyer debit. Insurance. So again, all we need to do here is total up our columns, and we end up with $41,000 in buyer credits. And on the buyer debit side, we've got $50,000 plus 200 plus 100 plus 120 plus 100 is $50,520. And if they want to know how much money the buyer needs to bring to closing, it's going to be $50,520 minus $41,000. And that is a total of $9,520 that the buyer needs to bring to closing on that transaction. $9,520. Number 10, a real estate sale closed on February 20th and the real property taxes have not been paid. The estimated value of the property is $67,500 and the tax value is 80% of that market value. Tax rate is $1.50 per 100 of tax value. Using a 360-day year, what's the proper entry on the seller's settlement statement regarding real property taxes? So again, find the question. What is the entry on the settlement statement regarding property taxes? So they're asking us how much are the taxes and how's that proration going to look on the closing statement. So anytime we're prorating closing taxes on a closing statement, we're going to use our two statements. The seller owes, and they always owe from January 1 through the day of closing, so that's February 20th. And then that means the buyer owes the balance of the year, so that's going to start on February 21 and go through December 30th. Now, we have to ask ourselves, what happened outside of closing? Because we want to do the opposite here. It says in our statement here that the taxes have not been paid. The real property taxes have not been paid. So, if they've not been paid, that means they're going to be paid later in the year by the buyer. The buyer is paying outside of closing, so therefore we want the seller to pay at closing, because we want to do the opposite of what happens outside of closing. So it's going to be seller owes, which means it's going to be debit seller. And if it's debit seller, it's credit buyer. I really recommend you get that straight before you actually do the math. That way you make sure the money's flowing in the correct direction. So debit seller, credit buyer. Now let's figure how much. Well, from January 1 through February 20th, we have 30 days in January plus 20 days in February is a total of 50 days. So we have 50 days we need to work with. Here's what we know. We know that the property has a market value of $67,500 and that the tax value is 80% of the market value. So we need to do some work here and we need to come up with the tax value of the property. So $67,500 times 80%, that'll give us our tax value on the property. That equals $54,000 tax value. And we remember from way back in the beginning of class, our T-bar for property taxes has got the tax bill on the top, and down on the bottom we have the assessed tax value and then the tax rate. So if we want to know the tax bill, which we do need to know, we can't prorate it unless we know how much the bill is, we need to be multiplying the assessed value times the rate. Well, we just calculated the assessed value of $54,000, and they told us that the rate is $1.50 per 100. So that's going to be times 1.5%. Because $1.50 per 100 is the same thing as 1.5%. And that gives us a tax bill for the year of $810. That's the bill that we're prorating. Remember, we need 50 days worth of that bill. So we need to break that down into daily. So divided by 360. And that gives us a daily rate of $2.25 per day times 50 days. So $2.25 per day times 50 days equals $112.50. Remember, we already wrote down which way that money was flowing, so I'm just going to go right back here and fill in $112.50 $112.50, and that's debit seller, credit buyer. $112.50, debit seller, credit buyer. Number 11, what's the loan discount expense if the buyer is purchasing a $110,000 home with a 90% loan to value ratio and the lender is charging 2.5 discount points? So they want to know, what is the loan discount expense? How much are the discount points going to cost? If the buyer is purchasing a $110,000 home with a 90% loan to value ratio and the lender is charging 2.5 discount points. Well, we know that each discount point, 2.5 discount points, we know that each point, 1 point, equals 1% of the loan amount. So we know 2.5 points is going to be 2.5% of the loan amount. Well, look at that picture. What are we missing? Looks like to me we're missing the loan amount. We don't know how much has been borrowed, so we need to calculate. $110,000 times 90% loan to value is $99,000. That's our loan amount. So $99,000 times 2.5% gives us a total charge for the discount points of $2,475. $2,475 for the discount points. Number 12, it says a buyer who has an annual income of $60,000 is applying for a conventional mortgage loan with monthly principal and interest payments of $975 and estimated monthly taxes and insurance of $125. The lender uses loan qualifying ratios of 28 and 36%. In order to qualify for the loan, what's the buyer's maximum allowable monthly recurring non-housing expense? Find a question. What is the buyer's maximum allowable non-housing? Non-housing equals debt. They want to know how much debt this buyer can afford. Well, this is a question about buyer qualification. When we have one of those questions, we're dealing with those two ratios, the 28% ratio, the 36% ratio. It says the buyer has an annual income of $60,000. Well, one of the first things we need to do is get rid of that annual income, because we got to work with monthly in this formula. So $60,000 divided by 12 is going to be $5,000 per month. Okay? So now when we start looking at this, we're going to start grouping these things. They want to qualify for a loan with monthly principal and interest payments of $975. So $975, because it's a housing expense, goes on both sides, because the 28% side is housing, the 36% side is housing plus debt. So housing's on both sides, so we got that $975 on both sides. So we've dealt with that. And estimated monthly taxes and insurance of $125. So taxes and insurance of $125 are also a housing expense. So we're going to go here on both sides. Sorry, I put PI, but it should be taxes and insurance. It should be TI on both sides. It says the lender uses loan qualifying ratios of 28 and 36%. In order to qualify for the loan, what's the buyer's maximum allowable monthly debt? They want to know debt. Well, debt only shows up in one place here. So the 36% ratio is going to tell us how much they can afford for housing and debt, and we know how much their house payment is. So let's take a look at that. If we take their $5,000 monthly income and multiply it times 36%. And of course over here we would also take that same $5,000 monthly income and multiply it by 28%. I don't want you to get out of the habit of doing both sides, so I'll do that as well. So 5,000 times 28%, that means we have $1,400 a month to spend on just housing. And if we take that $5,000 and we multiply it times 36%, we have $1,800 to spend on housing and debt. Well, if we know housing and debt equals $1,800, and we know that the housing equals these two numbers added together, $975 plus $125 is $1,100 a month. So the housing equals $1,100 of that $1,800. Could we not just subtract that to figure out how much we could afford for debt? So we can afford $1,800 for housing and debt minus the $1,100 for just housing. That gives us maximum monthly debt of $700. So that's a maximum amount we can afford in monthly debt payments, $700, or non-housing payments. It means the same thing, $700. Number 13, the subject house of an appraisal is 1,800 square feet. The highly similar comparable house in the same neighborhood is 1,950 square feet and recently sold for $105 per square foot of living area plus $25,000 for the lot. The subject lot is worth $5,000 more than the comparables lot, and the subject has a debt worth $2,500 that the comparable does not have. Based only on these factors, what's the indicated value of the subject? So there's our question. What is the indicated value of the subject? This is a CMA question. And so with a CMA question, we want to set up our columns. We have the subject, and we have the comparable. It says the subject house of an appraisal is 1,800 square feet. Okay, so the size of the house is 1,800 square feet. A highly similar comparable house in the same neighborhood is 1,950 square feet. And recently sold for $105 per square foot of living area plus $25,000 for the lot. So it sold for $105 times 1950 is $204,750 plus it sold for in addition to the lot itself sold for $25,000. So the actual sales price of the house was $229,750. So we're going to go back over here. We've got $229,750. That's our starting point for our comp. Now it tells us that the subject lot is worth $5,000 more than the comparables lot. Again, we can't talk about these things in terms of the subject. We have to talk about them in terms of the comp. So if the subject is worth $5,000 more, then the comp is worth $5,000 less. Okay? So we're going to put lot here, and under the comp, we're going to put worth $5,000 less. That deals with that. We dealt with this. Okay. It says that the subject has a debt worth $2,500 that the comparable does not have. So debt, the subject does have a debt, the comparable does not. So no. Now we want to do our adjustments. Don't worry about the debt being worth $2,500 because that's going to be an adjustment we're going to make, okay? So, adjustments. The first one is for size, square footage. The subject property is 1,800 square feet. The comparable property is 1,950, which means the comp is better, which means we need to adjust it down. So it's going to be down, it's going to be a negative adjustment by 150 square feet. We need to subtract 150 square feet. So minus 150 times, and we know that square footage is worth $105 a square foot. That's what they told us earlier. So minus 150 times 105, that's minus $15,750. That's our first adjustment. Now, so we've done the size. Check. Lot. What we know about the lot is that the comp's lot is worth $5,000 less. So the subject and the comp is worth $5,000 less. That means we have to bring the comp up by $5,000. And then finally the deck. The subject has a deck, the comp does not, therefore the comp is worse. That means we need to bring the comp up. And it says the value of the deck is $2,500, so it's going to be plus $2,500. And if we go back and we total all that up, $229,750, $229,750, that's our starting point, minus $15,750, plus $5,000, plus $2,500. That is a grand total of $221,500. That's our indicated value for our subject property based on this comparable. $221,500. Number 14 looks like another CMA question. And obviously it's a long and involved one. But as long as we know it's a CMA question, we're going to make our two charts, or two columns. Subject property, comparable property. Now remember, it's always a good idea to put appreciation in there, just because it's a reminder to do it first if they do ask for it. Alright, it says the licensee is preparing a CMA in connection with listing a house for sale. The two-story house is 7 years old and has vinyl siding. Okay, so we're going to do age, we're going to do siding, and the subject is 7 years old and has vinyl. So it's 2,600 square feet of living area. 3 bedrooms, 2.5 baths. Alright, so size 2,600, bedrooms is 3, and then we have full baths and half baths. Remember, we have to split those up. Those have to be split. So we go back and it says it is 2.5 baths, so that's 2 full and 1 half. 2 full and 1 half. What else do they tell us about this property? It's a 1-car garage. Okay, so 1-car garage. With garages, we do them the same way as bathrooms. We have 1-car garages and we have 2-car garages. Well, it has one car and it has no 2-car garage. So we dealt with that. And then finally, recent kitchen and bath upgrades that have a market value of $18,000. So I'm just going to put upgrades. Yes. Now let's go see what they tell us about our comparable property. It says the licensee finds in the same neighborhood a very similar 2-story house with vinyl siding. So vinyl siding. So we can go down here and fill that in. That sold 5 months ago for $268. So we're gonna, our starting point is $268. And we know with the appreciation we've got 5 months. Okay? Okay, so we dealt with that. That house is 8 years old. Okay, so our age is 8 years. And has 2,500 square feet of living area. Alright, so 2,500. 3 beds, 3 baths, 2-car attached garage. So 3 beds, 3 full baths, and 0 half baths. And then on the garage side it has a 2-car attached garage. So it does not have a 1-car, that's 0, and it does have a 2-car, that's a 1. Or yes, however you want to say that. And then finally, and no significant upgrades. Okay, so no. Now we're finally ready to start working on the actual adjustments themselves. So the first thing we need to adjust for is the appreciation. We know that our comp sold for $268, but it sold for that 5 months ago. And therefore it would sell for more if it sold now. So here's what they tell us. We have to look to find it. It says price appreciation in the area has been about 5% during the past year. 5% annually. So 5% over the past year. That means if it sold a full year ago, it would have appreciated 5%. So let's figure out how much money that would be. So 268 times 5% is $13,400 annually, but it didn't do it a full year ago, so we need to break that down into monthly. Equals $1,116.67 a month times 5 months ago, because it happened 5 months ago. So that's a total appreciation adjustment of $5,583.33. $55.83.33. And appreciation is a positive adjustment, so it's going to be plus $55.83.33. Now, we also need to look at the rest of our adjustments. As far as age goes, there is a difference, so we need to go back and look and see, did they give us anything about adjusting for age? And they don't. There's nothing in there about adjustment for age, so I'm just going to have to leave that alone. That's going to be a 0. No adjustment. Well, the siding is the same, so that's going to be a 0. No adjustment. Size. I have a difference. Let me see if they gave me something to adjust with. And they did, because they tell me that current construction costs in the area, right here, for similar houses are $105 per square foot. So I do have the ability to make an adjustment for size. Now here's what I know. My subject property is 2,600 square feet. My comparable property is 2,500 square feet. That means the comparable is worse. So I need to bring the level of the comparable up. And it's going to be plus whatever 100 square feet is worth. So 100 times, and if I go back up, 105 per square foot. That is $10,500. Okay. And again, that's a plus $10,500. And there's our size adjustment. So now we go back to comparing again. Bedrooms are the same, so that's not going to be any adjustment at all. Full baths. My subject has 2 full baths. My comparable has 3 full baths. So my comparable is better. That means I need to bring the level of the comparable down. So that's going to be minus the value of a full bath, which they've told me is $6,000 for a half and $10,000 for a full. So this is a full, so it's going to be minus $10,000. Now when I look at half baths, my subject has a half bath, my comparable does not, so the comparable is worse. That means I need to bring it up, and they told us again the value of a half bath is $6,000, so that's going to be plus $6,000. When I get to the one-car garages, my subject has a one-car garage, my comparable does not, so I need to bring the comparable up by a one-car garage. So that's going to be plus the $10,000 they told us for a one-car garage up here. So plus $10,000. And then when I look at my two-car garages, my subject does not have one, my comp does have one, which means my comp is better. That means I need to bring the comp down, so that's going to be a negative adjustment minus the value of a two-car garage, which they tell me is $15,000 right there. So that's going to be minus $15,000. And then finally, upgrades. My subject is upgraded, my comp is not, so my comp is worse, which means I need to bring the level of my comp up, and it needs to come up by the value of the upgrades, and the value of the upgrades they told us was $18,000. So that's going to be plus $18,000. And that takes care of all of our adjustments. So now it's a matter of totaling everything up. I start with $268,000. And then I'm going to add my appreciation of $5,583.33. And then I'm going to add the $10,500 for the square footage. And then I'm going to subtract $10,000 for the full bath. And I'm going to add the $6,000 for the half bath. I'm going to add the $10,000 for the one-car garage, and I'm going to subtract the $15,000 for the two-car garage, and I'm going to add the $18,000 for the upgrades. And when you do all that, I come up with $293,083 and 33 cents. I'm going to check that number one more time just to make sure. Always when I'm keying in a long string of numbers like this, I want to check and make sure. Yep, $293,083 and 33 cents. That is the indicated value of that property. Number 15, a rental house is being sold for $145,000. A tenant is currently occupying the property and pays monthly rent of $800 that was paid on the first of the month. Closing will take place on November 24th. How should the current month's rent appear on the closing statement? Well, rent is always paid in advance. Therefore, rent's always been paid to the seller in advance. Rent prorations are always going to be debit, seller, credit, buyer. Always. You don't need to write the two statements out like you do in a property tax proration, because we always know which way the money's flowing with rent. It's always debit, seller, credit, buyer. And it's always going to be for the portion of the month from closing to the end of the month. So November 24th through November 30th in this case. It's always going to be the end portion of the month and debit, seller, credit, buyer. So what we need to know is how much rent would be paid And I apologize, I wrote the wrong thing. It's not going to be November 24th, it's going to be November 25th. I'm sorry, November 25th through November 30th, because the seller owns the November 24th date. So November 25th through November 30th. How should the current month's rent appear on the closing statement? Well, we know that's debit, seller, credit, buyer. Now we just need to know a daily amount. So we've got monthly rent of $800 divided by 30 days in a month. 800 divided by 30 equals $26.67 per day, times, and from November 25th through November 30th, we have 25, 26, 27, 28, 29, 30. That is 6 days. So 6 days equals $160. And again, that's debit, seller, credit, buyer.